Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about the top 3 cardinal sins that a lot of people make in multiplayer in Broken Arrow. These are things that you do want to avoid doing to a large extent. There is some value proposition, of course, in doing these things in certain circumstances, but there's also plenty of times in a lot of matches, or the vast majority of times, where doing these things is not just a waste of resources, not just a waste of potential, but it literally will hurt your chances of victory in a fairly substantial way. So first off, we have passive defensive players, or a passive defensive playstyle. Most matches that I've played in Broken Arrow, War Game, Steel Division, etc., what you will see a lot of the time is people just getting a bunch of units in a particular area that they've more or less claimed as their own, and then they're just gonna sit there in that area doing nothing, assuming that something is going to happen. Now, I can understand the logic of this, right? Because a lot of the time what people are doing, they're defending the control points. But even this is not necessarily a wise idea, at least the way people do it. The reason is that a lot of the time, people will just stack their infantry right next to each other. They'll get artillery units right next to each other, and they won't move them. It's one thing to get a bunch of artillery units close to each other. It's another thing to just constantly keep that artillery right in that same position, and then, getting destroyed by a cruise missile or an airstrike, or by enemy artillery. There is an enormous waste over here. Infantry can move. They can run, they have smoke grenades. You can use all of these to get them into the action. So instead of having your infantry standing on fixed positions for pretty much an entire match, it's much better to keep them moving. And if you lose them, well, so what? You start gaining more points the fewer units you have, and so you can call in reinforcements, maybe even better reinforcements. Maybe you can launch an armored assault on a particular objective, or maybe you can get a bunch of infantry. But on top of that, if you're keeping infantry on the control points, then that's the first target that an enemy team is going to attack with artillery, with long-range weapons, when they're making a move, when they're making a play on that particular objective. What I prefer to do is keep infantry on the move. If there's anything I've learned following various wars over the years, is this. Infantry that sits in static positions is wasted. Actually, it's suicidal because, it's just a clear indication for whoever they're fighting. We're here, blow us up. Please, blow us up. And so it's just better to have forward position. Whatever control point you have, you want your infantry to be forward. Now, there's situations where this isn't the case. Like in this particular match, I had 2 cavalry scout units with javelins near a control point defending it for much of the match, but that's because the enemy over here had made quite a few determined plays on that objective on the left side of the map, and so I knew that they were going to keep trying, and so in that circumstance it made sense. But a lot of the time it's just more useful to use infantry the way I'm doing it right here, just moving quietly. It might take a long time, but infantry that's moving quietly through the woods, through cover, through buildings, etc., trying to bypass enemy positions can actually do a lot of damage. Like over here, I only have a unit of mechanized riflemen, but because of those mechanized riflemen, the enemy is having to send main battle tanks to protect their artillery from being wiped out in this case. They will succeed, but it is a significant diversion. This is a much better way, and on top of that, it also helped reveal where they had some units. Well, I think the AC-130 that I had then sacrificed to try and do a gun run did a better job with that, but it moved them out of position and made them vulnerable, and that means that we can take advantage of that, or you can take advantage of that in a situation. So that's one of the cardinal sins a lot of people are responsible for. Keeping their units bunched together, using them too passively. And this doesn't just happen with infantry. It happens with artillery pieces. It happens with air defense pieces. Let me say this about air defenses. once they fired a couple of missiles, move your Patriots or S-300s, because if you're keeping them in the same location, guess what? You've just telegraphed the position of that anti-air unit to everyone. In real life, this is actual a tactic, like shoot and scoot, basically. And it applies to both artillery and air defense units. And also, you don't want to keep supplies on units. You want to keep supplies close enough, in a close enough location, so that your units can move to those supplies, but not on the units themselves, because it's just going to blow up if someone targets that position, and you're just going to lose a lot of points in the process. Speaking about supplies, one of the things I see a decent number of people, not necessarily a huge amount, but I do see this often enough that it's worth mentioning. I see people bringing vast quantities of supplies and just dumping them all in one particular location. This is a really, really bad decision. More often than not, you don't need more than, say, 4,000 supplies in a particular location. If we're talking about reloading artillery, repairing vehicles, refueling vehicles, repairing infantry or healing infantry, having more than 4,000 points of supply in a particular location is just a waste of those supplies, because they can be blown up very, very quickly. And you do want to avoid that happening. So beyond not keeping supplies right on top of your artillery or air defense units, you also don't want to build a vast quantities of supplies in one particular location. It's much better to have a bunch of vehicles dropping supplies at various points. Funnily enough, that actually happened in this match. My teammates had a whole bunch of supply caches all over on our side of the map, and that made those supplies much useful. Don't put more than, say, 7,000 points of supply, and 7,000, 8,000, something along those lines is only for things like HIMARS or ballistic missiles in general. Not air defense missiles. I'm talking here long-range artillery units. That is the only circumstance in which you should have a big quantity of supplies, but more often than not, it's better to have smaller caches of supplies. What you could do if you just want to bring a huge amount of supplies in one go, you bring a bunch of supplies, 20,000, something like that, and you deploy those way behind your lines, where the distance is just going to protect them, in most cases. And from that point, you can then send transport trucks to just pick up those supplies and spread them around as needed. That is a much better way of using supplies. But yeah, just don't concentrate your supplies, and for the love of all that is holy, don't use your supplies, don't dump your supplies right on your vehicles. Your vehicles should not stay in the same position, even if you're only moving them a couple of meters or a small distance away after you're taking some shots. That's generally enough to protect them against pretty much the vast majority of weaponry that an opponent is going to use against them. Now, number 3 has to do with reconnaissance. Reconnaissance is the key to winning battles, but more often than not, you see players doing a really, really bad job with regards to reconnaissance. I mean, they might use drones and some helicopters, though rarely do I see people using helicopters specifically for the role of scouting, which, incidentally enough, is one of the main roles helicopters actually do have in real life, and one of the reasons why a lot of countries right now are reconsidering using helicopters is because they've come to the conclusion that using drones for a lot of the roles that helicopters do traditionally have is just better. But even so, regardless of what you're using for recon, you should have recon capability. In this particular match that you're watching right here, one of these units that I had, a recon unit, I was able to get in behind enemy lines. They were damaged, they didn't do a lot of damage, but that wasn't important because the information that these guys were providing, just sitting still in the woods, doing nothing, in fact, they probably should have turned off their weapons, was so significant that it helped win us the match. I mean, mind you, we were already winning, we were 5v4, but we had to fight for it, partly because a lot of people are just playing the passive game way too much on that. But recon is important, and while I know it's not fun, It really is not freaking fun given the pacing of the game, the speed of the game, and all that. It's not fun to have to micro a unit of infantry to go from tree line to tree line, which, by the way, does happen in real life. That's how a certain war at the moment is being fought in Ukraine. While it's not fun having to micro small groups of infantry from tree line to tree line, it is so incredibly useful to have that recon capability, or a scout helicopter flying at low altitude, a cheap helicopter, any kind of cheap helicopter, maybe with some weapons, 18 missiles. Like, I really like the little birds for the United States in this particular role. Like, if I spawn Comanches or Apaches, it's because I'm doing a firefighter thing. I'm spawning them to deal with an armored column, and I know I'm probably going to lose them in the process, but it's just that firefighter role, as I'd call it. Which, by the way, I'm taking actually that from real life, because that's quite the role that these kind of units might have in real life in something like Ukraine. Anyway, point is, recon is important. Don't underestimate it. Use it. Pay attention to what's going on the map. Pay attention to the information you're getting, and seek to get that information in the first place yourself, because it is going to be very significant. So don't play statically, don't dump your supplies in just one point. In fact, just don't cluster your units in a single point more often than not. The one exception is like with armored assaults, but you do kind of want to have some distance even there. Like just a couple of meters will actually do wonders to protect individual units from being wiped out. So anyway, that's all I had to say. Let me know what you guys think, what other things you would consider very important in the context of the game. Costin, signing out.